This conference will now be recorded.
I see there's a caller 3. I don't know if that might be Julie.
Yes, it is, but it's telling me I'm unable to share the webcam.
Okay, I do see caller 3 and your name. So Councilman Osmus, you are with the.
And thank you to everybody sending me the links.
All right.
I appreciate it.
The recording has started, and caller number 1 is Rudy at Rack 8, so we're ready to go. And I will call the meeting to order, and we will do roll call.
Councilman Nelson. Councilman Nelson.
Here.
Councilman Fagerly.
Here.
Councilman Plowman.
Here.
Councilman Osmus.
Here.
I also have in attendance Mayor Calvin, Councilmans Alvarado, Meske, Schwantes, Davis, reporter Shelby Lindred from West Central Tribune, staff Administrator Gromitz, Finance Director Okens, Park and Rec Director Rob Baumgarten, Public Works Director Sean Christensen, Fire Chief Frank Hansen, Rudy Vigil from Rack 8, City Attorney Robert Scott, and Doug Green and Kathy Aho from Baker Tilly. Is there anybody on the meeting that I have not mentioned?
Dave Ramstad's here.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Dave, you are showing up as caller number 3.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Okens. We don't have any members of the public here, so we won't worry about public comment. I just would like to remind us that we're all here tonight, and I want to say thank you for all the efforts of all of you to be here, for the good questions that the council members have asked, and for the good responses that have been put together from our staff. I hope that we can remain open-minded and open to the information to see what steps we need to do next and when we need to do them. And so with that, we have one action item that the Finance Committee needs to take care of, and I will go to Finance Director Okens to present the items for the 2020 improvement bonds.
Councilman Nelson, members of the council, and mayor, included in your packet is a memo from Baker Tilly from Mr. Green, outlining a schedule and information as it relates to bonding and some preliminary schedules for retirement of those bonds. The council has approved a 2020 street improvement project earlier in the year of $3.4 million. Of this amount, $1.9 million is needed to be bonded. The remaining amount is funded through other various sources of state aid money, municipal utility, and waste treatment funds. Of the $1.9 million in bonds that is being recommended, it is estimated that approximately $740,000 of that will be paid from special assessments. The special assessment hearing is actually scheduled for the City Council meeting on Monday, May 18th. The amount of debt service estimated to be approximately $232,000 of this amount. $92,000, which would be principal and interest on those assessments previously mentioned, and the remaining $140,000 is scheduled to be paid for from the Community Investment Fund, which is the fund that pays or has paid the city's portion of the street improvement project since 1990 when the fund was established. The action looking for tonight would be to introduce a resolution calling for a public hearing on an ordinance authorizing the issuance of $1,965,000. And Representatives Doug Green and Kathy Aho are on the meeting tonight after the action to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, is there anyone interested on the Finance Committee to introduce that resolution?
I'll make that resolution.
Second. Osmus.
We have a motion and a second to introduce a resolution calling for a public hearing on the ordinance authorizing the issuance of 1,965,000 general obligation improvement bond series 2020A. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, we will go to roll call.
Councilman Fagerly,
Aye.
Councilman Plowman,
Aye.
Councilman Osmus,
Aye.
Councilman Nelson.
Aye.
4 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. That motion passes. That is our only action item that is scheduled tonight. And so our next agenda items are discussion items, and I am going to go to Administrator Gramitz to start our discussion items. And the first one that's listed there is the City Hall Community Center project of $10.5 million.
Okay, Finance Chair Nelson, as you're all aware, you've got a copy of the agenda that basically outlines the 3 major things that are confronting us at this point in time. The 4th item is actually the 2021 budget, which will be taking direction from the City Council and working towards preparing the mayor's budget, which he'll then present later this year. The agenda is not by importance or suggested importance by me or anybody. It's just the way they lay it out. But we can start discussions of all of these particular projects and how they interrelate with the levying of taxes and what it means in the long run, given the COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in, and whether or not that's prudent. Those are all decisions that are left up to the City Council. But I think it's staff's responsibility to give you as much information as possible so that you can make a decision in the end. So the first item that I wanted to work with you on, providing information on, was the City Hall Community Center project. And quite simply, as I think we're all aware, that was a $10.5 million project, of which $2 million of the revenue would be coming from the local option sales tax. And the decision on how to fund the $8.5 million has yet to be made for the City Hall portion and at any additional costs that the community center might incur in its construction. I can just basically right now, I can kind of tell you that $2 million is probably not enough to fund just the community center. So it's going to be a combination of city money and the local option sales tax to put the community center up. And that was in conjunction with the City Hall. We did select a site, and we also have selected an architect and a construction manager. Both organizations are aware that the COVID-19 basically put them in slow motion. They've not done a lot at this point in time, although they have done a little bit, like $8,000 worth of work, compared to $10.5 million. That's not a lot. But they're holding back because they want to know from the City Council what the council wants them to do. So the impact on the $8.5 million on the tax levy results in about $810,000 worth of a tax levy. That amounts to about a 13.5% increase in property taxes. And any amount that the City Council wishes to pre-fund on that, and I mean use existing revenues in a reserve account or money we have on hand, cash on hand, would reduce that and also reduced the 8.5 million, but it was also reduced the over $800,000 down to 600,000 or whatever you wanted to do. So with that, we just kind of move on. So the financial impact, the secondary impact, which we've had some discussion with Mr. Green and Ms. Aho on the actual ability to sell the bonds. That's probably even more important. If we don't have the 8.5 million, we can hardly build, the city hall portion. And we'll talk about the 2 million from local option sales tax as we get further along. There have been cities that have gone into the market and sold bonds on the market. And as I've been told, there are some cities that have gone out with the bond issue and nobody bought them. Now, things might have changed since the time we had that discussion. Maybe, maybe the market has opened up a little bit, but in looking at the way the stock market's reacting the last 2 or 3 days, it's going red. It's going in the wrong direction. So maybe we can have an update on that as it pertains to just the basic city hall. We're not really even talking the local option sales tax revenue bonds, but we'd be talking the GO portion. Councilor Alvarado.
I got a question, and it's going to probably be for the experts. You indicated in your conversation that some of the cities aren't selling bonds. What are their ratings, and what is influencing the fact that they're not selling the bonds? What's causing that to happen? Is it their city ratings, or what's the underlying factors prevent them from being able to sell bonds? So you can tell me later or whenever. Thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Again, good to see everyone. We have to quit meeting this way, but one day I'll be able to drive out west. It's a good question. Actually, the municipal bond market's working pretty well. It's for general obligation high-rated bonds. And so, every week in Minnesota, there's probably, a good half dozen that sell. And throughout the country, there's, a couple, well, I don't know, I'd venture to say up to at least 50 that sell each week. So in those bonds that are selling competitively are general obligation high-rated bonds, AA and above. I would say probably even high single A rated and above. And we've seen good demand for them. There's a functioning market. We're getting, a good amount of bidders, and those bids are pretty close together, which is a good sign. So that means that people have a good understanding about where interest rates are, where prices are. So I would not be concerned right now with selling general obligation highly rated bonds at the city.
Okay, thank you. Things change in a couple weeks. All right. So while we have you on talking about bonds, Doug, what do you see as, is there any impediment to obviously the GO-backed revenue bonds for local option sales tax? So we'll have that information up front before we get into it.
So again, another good question. The investors, well, the underwriters who purchase them, and then ultimately the investors, they really just care about the general obligation rating. They certainly might look at what the underlying revenue source is to pay for those bonds, and really where that is going to factor into is in the credit rating. But ultimately, the credit rating is going to be based off of the city's general obligation pledge. So the credit rating and the investors, they'll take a look at what the underlying revenue source is to pay, but ultimately they just want to know that it's the general obligation of the city.
Okay, thank you.
And again, the sales tax, the bonds that you're considering selling for, excuse me, they'll be general obligation bonds. The projects that are going to be financed with sales taxes.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Asmus, did you have something you wanted to say? Your mic is green. Nope.
Nope, I'm just
Yep.
trying to figure out why my camera's not working.
Okay.
Keep going.
Remember when I asked Ross to see if your tablet was working? Yeah,
Yes, I do.
technology. All right. So let's make the assumption that we can sell bonds, and that will be the underlying theme for the rest of the discussion, that we are capable of selling bonds. So then the only thing that limits us is our I think desire to either go into debt, pledge property tax revenues, or have the correct amount of local option sales tax monies available to pay those debts off. All right. So we do know that Mid-Minnesota Development Commission has decided to move out of the existing city. So that's kind of like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's been probably a good relationship to have the two organizations together. But on the other hand, it does help reduce the actual cost of the city hall if we don't have to build, an additional 2,000 square feet, at X dollars a square foot. So it could potentially reduce the scope slightly. So then the question, quite simply, is do we want to continue the design of the City Hall Community Center? Do we want to talk about bringing Rack 8 out to City Hall? And will there be enough sales tax to help pay for the community center side of the project? I'll just stick my toe in the sales tax side. We'll talk about those projects a little bit more in depth in the Invest in Wilmer project section. But I think the answer is we probably, if we were ready to go right now with City Hall Community Center and we were willing to sell $8.5 million in GO bonds, the sales tax would have enough money available to fund the $2 million in the community center. But as I think you're all aware, the design of the city hall probably wouldn't get done till late fall. We'd probably, go out to bid in, January, February for construction to start. So we don't have a ready project that's, just ready to go. It's going to take, the next 9 months to get through the process. I know people were hoping to, get City Hall up and running faster than that, but that's actually not likely to happen. All right, so that's something to think about. Anybody have any questions about how we would finance? I know we probably have questions about what it's going to look like and how it all fit together. I did have some conversations earlier with a council member that said, well, knowing today what we didn't know 2 months ago, maybe we will design, the city hall differently, maybe in anticipation of social distancing in the future between staff and office and space, within the city. And I think the answer to that is probably true. And that would be part of our discussion as we went through the design phase, through the rest of the summer and into the fall. But generally speaking, if there's no other questions that would be based on the city hall and community center side of it, we can go into the discussion of the local option sales tax and how the sales tax is playing out. So anybody have any questions?
Administrator Gramitz,
Yes.
when you indicated that there would be dollars in the local option sales tax to use towards the community center, is that if we don't use them for other projects, or are you saying there's enough to do more than one project?
Okay, well, yeah, actually that probably is a good segue into the local option sales tax projects. As you're well aware, the Robbins Island project has gotten to approved plans and spec stage, and we're just waiting to bid, which is really kind of the reason for having this meeting. How do we go forward with bidding out Robbins Island when we don't know the sales tax revenue, how it all fits together? What's the priority of all the projects compared to Swanson Field and the event center and stormwater? How does it all fit together, and is there enough money? And so when I made that comment, I knew I was going to have to explain more information on that when we get to the local option sales tax projects. And the short story is this: Robbins Island is ready to go, and that's a $3 million project. The Swanson Field was expected to go this fall, and that's a $2 million project. Now, I'm assuming that Swanson Field gets all their plans and specs, put together, and we can bid it and get it done this fall. But that would happen in 2020, okay? And the amount of sales tax revenue that's coming in is let's say it's $1.2 million, $100,000 a month. I hope it's more than that, but I'm just going to take a conservative view on that. We receive $100,000 a month, so that's $1.2 million, and Swanson at $2 million has a debt service of roughly $200,000. Robbins Island at $3 million has a rough debt service of $300,000. So between those two, that's $500,000 of debt. And if you remember, you've got $1.2 million of revenue that came in. So that gives you $700,000 that you could do another project. And obviously the community center at $2 million is less than $7 million. So that would be one of those projects you could slide in if we were ready, but we're not ready for 2020. Okay. Can we bring in the event center? Well, we only have potential capacity for $7 million project, and the event center is 10. So that doesn't fit. Can we bring in the recreation fields? That's $6 million. That potentially fits, but the question in my mind is, are we cutting our buffer safety a dollar amount so close that it becomes uncomfortable? That's a question for the council, because all it takes is another downturn, and now instead of 1.2 million, we're receiving 900,000. That's the only concern that I would have at that point in time, is that something else happens. Now we don't have enough sales tax, and now so that everybody understands, anything you don't receive on local option sales tax, because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the city, because of the GO part of that bond that you sold to do the project, if you don't have enough sales tax, you have to put it on your property taxes, or you got to find a way to pay for it, somehow. So that's a risk, and I'm risk adverse. So any project that puts me at the upper limit, it makes me uncomfortable. So the question is, this year, if we get $1.2 million, is there any flexibility to do other projects? And the answer is maybe. And my response to that is, if the projects were able to get to plans and spec stage and to be done, this year, next year, or the year after, there is some capacity there. And it might be that, and I'm going to take the rec fields project, that I'll boil it down to three things. You've got your two fields that are football, soccer, lacrosse. You got 4 softball fields, and you've got the inflatable dome. You could potentially build all the fields, the softball fields and the football fields, and delay the dome. And so that project might be down to $4.5 million, which then gives you more cushion and more safety in case something happens in the future. So as we kind of talk about the Invest in Willmar projects, what I'm going to be asking the city council to think about and ultimately make a decision is the prioritization of those projects. Because one process would be to say, we're going to list them by priority, and we're going to take the first one and do it, and the second one and do it, and the third one. And if we run out of money, we don't do the fourth one. That scenario. Or you can say, we're going to do the rec fields, but right at the first, we're only going to do the fields and not the dome. Prioritizing in that way. So within each program or each project, prioritizing the different aspects of that project. So those are the two thoughts that come into play to try and keep things moving. If you have capacity in your local option sales tax revenue, if you have capacity, you may want to start cutting those projects up into smaller bites and do those projects and work towards this priority list that you would ultimately, make a decision on. So I've had some discussion with the city attorney on how this, how the city council may want to, consider doing all of this and still meet the letter of the law. The vote that was taken by the residents are anticipating certain things to happen. The law approved by the state legislature is anticipating some things to happen, but we didn't anticipate COVID-19. And that makes a big difference on how much local option sales tax revenue we have and how much we can spend on projects and pay for over a period of time. We do have 13 years listed as our time limit, and it is my understanding and my belief that because of the situation we find ourselves in, that if we went back to the legislature and said, hey, COVID-19, hurt us, pretty bad. Instead of 13 years, can you allow us to go 15 years or 16 years or whatever that magical number might be in order to get our projects completed? I wouldn't authorize all the projects and then go to the legislature. I think I would have some understanding that we can extend it for X years. And I think more analysis has to be done in order to figure out, is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4? Okay. So that's part of the presentation, and probably the more the part that everybody really is interested in is what's going on with the revenue side, because that is actually driving how many projects we can do. Any questions so far before we kind of talk about the revenue side?
Administrator Gramitz, I just wanted to see if any of the other council members or any council members have any other questions on City Hall before we move on to the other. All right, hearing none, we'll go right back to you.
All right. I sent out so much material that sometimes I wonder if my numbers are all jiving. But I did send out a spreadsheet that took the perspective of what if we assumed that we were getting the $100,000 a month for the first couple of years, 1.2, and then as the COVID-19 issue falls off and goes away, I'm hoping the economy comes back, the sales comes back, the sales tax received comes back, and it goes up, and then continues to climb for inflation for the remainder of the following 10 years, kind of a thing. And when I did that, it became, kind of apparent that I have big spreadsheets here. Steve appreciates this, I'm sure. It became apparent that we just are unable to finance all $30 million over the 13 years. If things change rapidly, that would change, but there are so many variables here. The spreadsheet I sent out had 13 years worth of revenue, and at the end of 13 years, we had received about $24 million in revenue, and we had $34 million in expenses. So we were about $10 million short. In my world, that creates a problem. That means 30 million of our projects are down to 20 million. And the only thing that one could do is go year by year. And this is kind of reflected in the response to a council member who I sent the answer out to all the city council members, was, if you look at that spreadsheet in year 2022, we got $1.4 million worth of revenue potentially, and we're short $1.6 million. So which projects are we going to delay? We're going to have to pick some. And $1.6 million, that equals the event center and the rec fields. It's just simple math. So on that spreadsheet, I went from what are the revenues we're currently earning and came up with a shortfall. On a second spreadsheet that I sent out, that analysis, I think it was a spreadsheet. Well, it was an analysis anyway. Took it from a different perspective. Mr. Okins was analyzing it. What should we be receiving? And that was about $2.1 million. Instead of my expected, 1.2 or 1.4 to start with, we were hoping to get 2.1. And even with 2.1, with adding inflation, 1% a year just to address that, we came up short. So, my first thought is that whomever put forth the estimation of sales tax was not real conservative, and I think was very optimistic, but it really hurts now even worse with the COVID-19 thing, because instead of 2.1, we're down at 1.2, 1.4, or thereabouts, 1.6. So that's a concern I have, and that leads me to believe that at some point in time, we're going to have to make some decisions on what projects are most important to us, which projects are a priority, and which projects are going to be delayed. There may be the potential for, like I said, the rec fields to say, we're going to do priority lists. We're going to do the football fields #1, the softball fields #2, and the dome #3. And when we run out of money, if all we get is the football fields and the softball fields, that's what we get. We tried. Mr. Scott can jump in anytime, and he sent me a rather lengthy analysis of what we can and can't do, in order to meet the voters' referendum and also the state legislature. But in the big scheme of things, you only have so much money, and you've got more projects than you have money for. Now, in a perfect world, it'd be great if things turned around real fast and change occurred and we were able to capture more revenue. So any questions on that so far? I mean, basically all I said was, not enough revenue, lots of projects, you're going to have to prioritize. Okay, that sums it up.
Administrator Grammitz,
Yeah.
I know that at our last finance meeting, there were questions about the legal parts. I'm just curious if any council members would like to hear from Robert Scott regarding the legal requirements at this time. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about meeting the legal requirements? All right, go ahead, Councilmember Meske.
I don't know if it's specific about the legal requirement, but I thought, let's just use the example that we just did with Robbins Island. I thought those groups were bringing forward, and I feel comfortable with them putting priorities, like the first one that we had come through. They laid out roads, the priorities, so on, and then we had some of those outbuildings prioritized from that group. I feel comfortable with that part because they know what the budgets were for those. If we don't build those elements, I would assume that's where legal would have some advice for us, but I thought we already kind of had the mechanism in place for prioritizing by those subgroups, but maybe I'm not correct on that.
Go ahead, Administrator Grammitz.
Yeah, I think that's how I've been assuming the operation would work, was that the committees would work through the process. But that's if we had $30 million worth of revenue and we had $30 million worth of projects. Now this throws us into a different court where, let's say we've got $20 million worth of revenue. Now the city council is going to have to make a decision to give direction to those committees and say, we have to cut $10 million out. It's just not going to fly. Or put them in a separate delayed basket and say, until the revenue comes back, we're not even going to entertain these sections of the projects. And then when the sales tax comes back, let's say it comes back wonderful in year 7, and say, yep, we can now do project 1, 2, and 3, but not 4, 5, and 6 of the delayed projects. You know, this is kind of a fluid thing. And so I'm kind of sitting there going like, how do you tell, you know, let's say, how do you tell a committee to sit there and say, yeah, plan on your $10 million. You know, we're not going to fund it. So I think people will be looking for leadership. Say, yeah, let's look at what does $7 million at the event center give us? What does, you know, $5 million? And maybe they have to bring forth some options, like you said, when it comes time to actually approve them. But right now they're planning for the maximum right now. And when all the projects get put in and they put it on the city council table, somebody's going to say, well, you know, we can't fund this. You know, we're going to have to figure out a way to prioritize. And so I think it's best to tell them now what the council's thinking. Maybe it has to be a really big meeting or something where everybody gets in and this all gets hashed out. But obviously the leadership of this whole thing is going to be the council, because they're the ones that have to make the decision on the debt and spending the money and actually going ahead with projects. So that, you know, and unfortunately, I think, you know, I'm just going to say this isn't the way you're going to think. I know, but I'm just going to throw it out there and just say, if somebody said, well, the event center is the least priority. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying, let's say it was. That's the one that is probably furthest along in its project development for plans and specs. Then maybe another project that has a higher priority hasn't gotten to that point. You know, that committee has moved on a little bit faster than some of the other ones. And it's just kind of interesting. So to have the council lay a priority out there and say, okay, we only have so much money and we're going to prioritize them here. And when the money runs out, we're done. That gives everybody at least some direction. So I don't know that it's right. 10 years from now, everybody will be saying, Brian, that was the dumbest thing you ever did. or it was the right thing to do. I don't know, but I think the committee people themselves need to understand where they are and how much money, the revenue that's coming in versus the ability to bond and pay that back. So long answer to short question.
Councilmember Meske.
Thank you for the answer. So what I'm hearing is probably the council would have to come up with our best guess of where that number might be now, and then send it to the committees. I'd still prefer the committees do that. That's where all of your champions and most people that know about those projects are at. So I guess that does lead to the legal question then. I would assume we would not take an entire project out when those were voted for by the residents of our community. So what is our obligation then to address all of the projects that were included in the local option sales tax question?
You're on, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the council and committee. The way I'm reading the statute, it doesn't necessarily contemplate this exact situation where right after you enact a local option sales tax, the revenue projections dramatically change. But basically, the statute imposes a restriction on how those local option sales tax revenues can be spent. Meaning, and the restriction is that they can only be spent on projects approved by the voters. So you can't impose the tax based on a certain list of projects and then take the money and spend it on something else. That's pretty basic. It does not compel the city to actually construct every project that was voted on. So the city does have, I mean, if you're facing the situation you appear to be now, where there just simply isn't revenue to support the full list of projects, you are not under any obligation to construct all of them. And even if there were not a revenue shortfall, as appears to be the case, future city councils could always vote not to construct any given project. So the way I think of it, if you're a visual person, is each of the projects specified in the resolution that the voters voted on and in the special legislation, think of it having its own silo and the different size silos depending on the amount of money allocated to them. You have the authority to spend up to that much, but you don't have to spend it all, and you don't even actually have to spend any of it legally under any of the under the statute. So for now, that's my legal analysis. It gets a little tricky if we start talking about combining projects or changing the scope of them, and then we have to worry about if we've created a new project, and that would be, in that case, you could not spend the local option sales tax money on a new project that was not submitted to the voters. But I think for now, I think the basic takeaway is that you're not compelled to construct every single project that went to the voters. It really operates as a restriction. It doesn't compel you to spend that money on any of the projects.
All right, anyone else have any questions for Mr. Scott? Okay, I just have, go ahead, Councilmember Alvarado.
Yeah, Mr. Scott, I was just wondering, you had mentioned that we didn't have to spend money on any of the silos if we didn't want to. But let's say we took a conservative tact and we decided that we were going to fund projects, but we weren't going to be aggressive about it. We were going to save some of the money and maybe earmark it for, the dome. And it doesn't go the way we want it, and we decide, well, we can't afford to build a dome. What happens to that money then?
I think
Mr. Scott.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair Nelson. Councilmember Alvarado, I think in the case that the city decides not to pursue a project that the tax is generating revenues to support, to the extent that now you just have money sitting somewhere that you've collected for a project. I mean, in that case, the answer is I think the city should be repealing the tax rather than collecting money for a project it doesn't intend to construct. I don't believe that's the primary issue facing the council right now. I think as I listen to the discussion, the council would like to spend all the revenue it generates. So your problem isn't what to do with money you've collected for a project that you don't want to pursue anymore. It's that you don't have enough money to do everything you want to do. Did I answer your question?
Yes. What I worry about is we don't know what the future is holding with the pandemic, and I think that I'd like to think we're going to be conservative about it and be smart about it and not bite off more than we can chew. And I think sometimes we as a city have tried to build up funds to have available to take a big bite out of the project when we go to start the project. That's what I recall some of the other councils doing. They've saved and they've been able to put money towards it, and it keeps the cost down and that sort of thing. So that's why I was approaching it that way. I know we want to do the projects. I fully understand we want to do the projects, but I also understand that we don't know the severity of the COVID-19 and how that's going to affect the community long-term or the state or nation. So that's why I'm talking that way. I'm not saying not to do the projects. I'm saying they may not be able to be done just because, Thank you.
Administrator Gramitz, I think one of the things that I think question came to me tonight is the prioritization of the projects. And we've had Robbins Island in front of us, and we talked about that project could actually save the city money by doing it because the parking lots and things need to be done out there. But I guess the question that comes into my head is we need to have a process to prioritize, even if we look at Swanson Field versus the community center. If we can we afford to do, how do we decide which one comes first? That if the revenues do not recover, kind of thing, that we take the time to make a decision ourselves with what project is more important. And so I'm curious with your thoughts about how we can work together to try to prioritize the projects.
Yeah, my thought, I guess, on that after talking with staff was that Robbins Island is an improvement of an existing facility, and for all practical purposes should not necessarily increase future budgets. There's, if we plow snow now, we'll be plowing snow off the parking lot next year and the next year and the next. That doesn't change. Swanson Field, kids are going to play on those fields. We're going to mow the grass. That doesn't change a whole lot either. There's not a lot of operational costs except maybe the lights. If that's going to cost us more if we put lights out there. But I think there's lights out there that are just kind of leaning and they're going to replace them. So that shouldn't cost us anymore. But the event center, adding, let's say 15,000 square feet of more air conditioning and more electric, more gas, natural gas for heating, more custodial, more maintenance, that does add to future budgets. The recreation fields, somebody's mowing the grass right now. I think it's a school. So that would increase our budget, but it's just mowing grass. It would increase striping costs, for the various, well, I guess it's turf. So it wouldn't it'd be there already. Wouldn't have to restripe every year. So there would be a slight uptick like in the rec fields for future budgets. So when we were looking at it, we were saying, what projects have the least impact on the taxpayer, in the short term? And those are Swanson Field and Robbins Island. Another area, obviously, is stormwater. As a matter of fact, that goes the opposite direction. If you don't put it on your taxes, it's more beneficial to use a local option sales tax to fix the stormwater thing. So that takes the pressure off. And those were probably smaller projects that could be done or not could be done as originally planned. But if you look, I guess in my mind, if you're looking for like a rationale as to why you would say, why I would pick this project over the next one item comes to mind, and that is future pressure on budgets. Now, the other thing would be is what do the citizens want the most? You know, what did they tell you as a city council? Said we absolutely want the event center, even though that's the one that probably costs us the most. You could look at the rec fields where you go, softball's not so bad, the football field turf's not so bad. What really hurts on that project is the utilities on the inflatable dome. Something's got to keep the dome up, you know, it's got to be running all the time, and it costs, you know, $25,000, $30,000 a month during the winter to keep it running. So that's a very large operational expense, whereas you don't have that kind of expense with Robbins Island or with the or the Swanson Field. So that was part of the discussion that we had at the staff level, and I guess I'd be open to hearing, you know, those things that are concerning of the city council, you know, as to which projects, you know, they would believe, you know, no matter what it costs, you know, this is a priority, we have to do it. Or is it, you know, they're like my children, I love them all equally, you know. But that's the whole purpose of this meeting tonight, is to talk about priorities, you know, to talk about who are we going to let go forward to do plans and specs, because that incurs money, and we've got money for that. This first year, we could do all the soft costs except City Hall and Community Center. We could do all the soft costs for everything else minus stormwater, that's off to the side. But the recreation projects, we could get all those done, and they could sit on a shelf, and you could bring them up and say, hey, we've got sales tax capacity, we're going to do this project. That's great. Unfortunately, there might be one project when you get all done still sitting on the shelf that you spent $400,000 architectural fees on, that you just didn't have enough money in your revenue stream to do that project. So do you say, is that wasted? Or do you say, at the end of 13 years, we're gonna you know, try and redo our local option sales tax for another 13 years so we can get that project done. You can still pick up that plans and specs, revise it for the current code, and move on with it. That's one way, or you start over and redesign it. So that's the potential problem with getting all of the soft plans and specs done up front and then do the projects as you have money. You might waste $400,000 on plans and specs that you never do. On the other hand, once they're on your shelf, on your desk, when the money is there, you're not going to wait 9 months to get your plans and specs done when you want to pull the trigger and say, let's sell bonds and get this project going. There's no delay either. So on one hand, you got no delay. On the other hand, you have potential wasted money on plans and specs that may not ever get done, or may get done 10, 15 years from now. So that's that, I guess, the concept of doing the soft costs up front and then moving forward, or prioritizing and saying, we're going to work on this one, this one, this one, and when we run out of money, we're done.
Administrator Gramitz, you had sent out a sheet about the soft costs. Could you review that? Because when you're talking about the sales tax that we're getting in this year would pay the soft costs, so the figures we're talking about to make payments would be the start of 2021. Is that what you're talking about? Or would you just review the soft costs and our obligation right now?
Right. In 2019, in October, we started receiving local option sales tax monies, and we received about $580,000. So I use $600,000 just for ease of doing math in my head. So we have 600,000 in 2019, and in 2020, we look like it's going to be lower than that. You know, we don't necessarily have all the facts and figures, but a really conservative number is 100,000 in sales tax a month. Remember, we were hoping to have 250,000 in our projections, 3 million a year, and now we're down to 1.2 million a year. And so I think that's fairly conservative. And so with 2019 and 2020, we would have $1.8 million, 600,000 and 1.2. That's bare bones. I feel comfortable with that number. I'd even stake my job on it. I need a drink after that. All right. So if we have at the end of 2020, we have $1.8 million. And what I sent out was all the soft costs minus City Hall plus the stormwater hard costs that we had already committed to. We committed to, you know, $400,000 worth of that work. And you end up with a rough cost of $1.7 million in expenditures in 2020. That's all the soft costs. That's all the plans and specs. It's all put together. It's all done, except for stormwater and City Hall Community Center. Those three things are set off to the side. So I feel comfortable that in 2020 we've got the money to do all the soft costs. The question is that the right thing to do? You know, that's the question that the council is going to have to answer. So that's where I was coming with my spreadsheet that came out a long time ago, and I gave to the Invest in Wilmer and also City Council, was that we have roughly 1.8 million in revenue and we have roughly 1.7 in expenses. So this first year we could cover the soft costs, and then in 2021, when we have to make our debt payments, you know, for, let's say, for Robbins Island and Swanson, that's when those payments will come due, and we'll be able to collect all of 2021, you know, to hopefully pay those off. And there's even things that we could do maybe with our financing. I've seen where they've delayed the principal for a year or two. I know we did it in Walm, where we had said, hey, timing wise, this just isn't going to work out. So we just set up our financing to delay paying principal. We had to pay interest, but we didn't have to pay the principal, okay, for the first year and a half or 2 years. So there are some things that can help soften the blow if you want to say, well, let's generate some money, get it in-house, and then start paying the principal off as far as debt is concerned. So those are some things that we'd be, I think, running past both Doug and Kathy in trying to, you know, make everything mesh from the financial perspective. But understand, if you delay principal for the first 2 years, that means the last 11 years, the principal is going to be higher. You know, there's always a plus and a minus. So that's, you know, you can front end, rear end load the principal, less in the front, more in the back. I mean, because believe it or not, in 13 years, inflation will take over. The COVID-19 will be in our rearview mirror. We won't even be thinking about it in 13 years, and we'll be going, oh look, yeah, we have all this money here now due to inflation, and that's just the way life is. So hopefully that answers your 2020 question.
Just one clarification, the soft costs that you gave us, is that to date or if we finish with the architects?
most of the expenses are there, and that would be as if we completely finished the architects. If we did everything. If the city council decided to prioritize and say, we're going to do these 3 and we're going to hold off on that one, then you wouldn't have as much expense, but you'd have the same amount of revenue, so you'd have a little bit more buffer for the first year.
Councilman Nelson, I see that Councilman Osmus has her mic on. I don't know if she wants or has a comment.
I do.
Okay,
I
go
go?
ahead, Jill.
Okay, Councilmember Meskey kind of alluded to this, but I'm trying to look at the big picture and see how the Invest in Wilmer group, how we work with them. Because as Councilmember Meskey stated, they've championed these. They started this ball rolling. And so part of what I'm trying to look at for the time frame piece of it is, if they're going to have to meet, and let's say they can't do an event center for less than 10 million, or they have to make some plans for how they can maybe do it with 7.5 million. But if we have the architects in place, they have to know what they're dealing with first. I mean, I feel like we have to make those decisions first of what's going to get cut and what isn't, and before the architects can start to do their designs that we can start to move ahead on. And if moving even farther, hoping that we could get an extension of 3 or 4 years on top of the 13, will that then give us enough to do all of them? I was under the impression it still didn't. So we have some serious decisions to make of what's going to get cut, and I'm just a little bit unclear of exactly how that process goes after all these different committees have met and what they say they can or can't live with. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mr. Gramitz, or if there's anyone else who wishes to speak to that one.
I think Mr. Plowman had his hand up.
Oh, I apologize. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I would echo the question brought up by Councilwoman Osmus. But I also, I'm having a hard time digesting this conversation because we're trying to project into the future, but we're in like this micro ecosystem that we're not out of yet, and we're trying to plan for what we're going to do when we're out of this ecosystem, and we don't know what the next ecosystem is going to look like. And so it's kind of like we're trying to project numbers, and we're trying to figure how we're going to do this and who's going to go first and how and what's going to go first and what the process is. And I'm kind of like, is this even the right time to be discussing it, or is this the time where we should be like talking about this is going on the shelf or this is getting paused and for how long? Because I feel like it's just one of those things that I have faith that things are going to be okay, and I know that long term we intend to do these projects, but we literally don't know what the governor is saying right now. We don't know what the financial condition, what the economic conditions are going to look like a month down the road, 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road. So to really be doing a good job at planning this, I feel like is almost spitting in the wind, because it's going to be a completely different atmosphere when the conversation comes back around. So my feel, and you may think that I'm crazy, whatever, but my feel is just if we kind of know where we're at financially and we want to do right by the taxpayers that we are currently, that we have collected money from and we are going to be collecting money from, then we should try to continue to spend on the projects as they voted. And we can do that by doing what Administrator Gromans was alluding to regarding engineering services, soft costs, whatnot. We can have those planned and ready to go. But as far as what goes first or whether or not they should be replanned or whether or not it should be redesigned or the total, I feel like all of that is just pointless discussion because we have no idea what the money is going to be, when it's going to be, where it's going to be, or what it's going to look like. So I guess I'll pause on that, but it's just the whole concept of adding everything together just makes it difficult for me to even try to plan. Thanks.
Go ahead, Administrator Grammitz, and then I see Councilmember Meske would like to speak too.
Yeah, I think just in response to Mr. Plowman, I like to boil things down into their simplest issues. And I look at it like this, is that we thought we were going to have $3 to spend. We only have $1.50, but that doesn't mean we can't spend the $1.50. You know, we probably will never say never, but I can't believe the economy goes down to zero where we have no sales tax whatsoever. I mean, that kills a deal for everybody. So that's not likely going to happen. But at the same time, we're not going to get $3 million a year either. We know that's not going to happen. But we do know somewhere in the middle is the amount of revenue we're going to be receiving. And preliminary indications are it's probably going to be between, maybe $100,000 a month and $150,000 a month. I don't know what that magical number is, but somewhere in there. And at $100,000 a month, we can go forward with some of the projects. But the question is, are these the priority projects you want to do, or are they not? And if it's the first come, first served process where the first plans and specs that hit the floor, at the council meeting, they get done. And then the next one gets done. And then when the next one comes, we don't have enough money for you, but you were our #1 project. That's what I want to get past the city council is, are all of the projects equally loved and have the same weight, or are the projects like Swanson and Robbins Island, are they good projects to carry forward to the city council to authorize to let go for bids when they get done? Because they're going to be the first two. Robbins Island is already there. Swanson is probably, should be shortly on its heels, early summer to midsummer, I would think. And if that is in fact true, then as they come up to the council just addresses them and we go, you're next. Yep, there's enough capacity. And when we reach a point when there's no capacity, we say, we'll put you on delay until we have more money. So if that's how if that's how it goes, I'm good with that. But this is an opportunity for the council to say, this project is more important than this other one for these reasons. So that's, we have money that we can do some of the projects. So from my perspective, we can make decisions, set priorities, and move forward. So all I have to say, I think Sean was next or something.
Yep, go ahead, Councilmember Meske.
All right, thank you. And yes, Mr. Plowman, you are crazy, but I think there's some wisdom of somewhere in between. I don't like the, and maybe nobody's intended to say this, but the all or none kind of idea for some of these projects. I think there are too many variables right now. I'm also risk adverse. And I think if you make the wrong decision here, it could be very foolhardy and filled with folly at this point. So as I look at it, it's like, well, I have no problems putting the brakes on actually all the projects right now and going into a prioritizing of projects. I think that's fine. But I don't think any project should be seen as not prepared to go to the next step. But that is where you're gonna have to have much more of an assessment, and that's where I would call on those groups to come back together and say, okay, well, for the Robbins Island project, and I'm not saying this is a thing, but just for instance, those outbuildings, we're putting those parts off and moving forward with this, and then we should probably begin that process if that's a priority for the council. But if one ends up at the bottom of the list, I don't want it to be removed from the list because we don't know what those projections are going to be in the future. So maybe it's prioritizing and planning with frugality as we move forward. I think we can do a combination because I was hearing a lot of this, it's an all or none. And I don't want to cut any project out at this point. I think that would be very foolish. But also throwing a lot of money into these projects when there isn't any revenue coming in is equally foolish. So I think Councilmember Plowman is correct. There's a lot of variables in this position right now, and you've alluded to them as well. But I think City Administrator Grams, you've laid out the scenario very well. I think everybody understands it. It's just a matter of what do you want to do first? Set a money limit first or set a priority listing first and so on. So I don't know the answer.
Chairman Nelson,
Yes.
something that I want to get out on the table before it slips my mind is I'm going to take Robbins Island as an example. It's a $3 million project, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Okins, but each of the projects has the ability to not spend 10% for the benefit of another project. So a $3 million project could go to 2.7 and then allow $300,000 to go to the event center or somewhere else where it's needed. And so then the question quite simply is do you take one shelter out instead of two, to maximize? Because if you were to cut 400,000 out of Robbins Island, technically there's 100,000 there that nobody can access. Robbins Island is the only one that can access that $100,000. None of the other projects can take it because they can only take 300,000 from that $3 million project. Correct, Mr. Okins?
The 10% is in the statute, and I may defer to Attorney Scott. That 10% is a deviation factor of any one or all projects, I believe is how it's stated. How that would be interpreted, I'll leave that up to Mr. Scott.
Chair Nelson, members of the committee, I think the way I think of it is if you go back to that silo analogy, for any one silo for the project, you can take 10% of that, and it has to be by ordinance that the council passes, and allocate it towards any of the other projects. Is that clear?
Yeah, that was my understanding. So I guess what I wanted to put on so everybody's understanding is that okay, we're going to take $500,000 in shelters and we're not going to do them in Robbins Island. Well, 300,000 of the sales tax money can go to another project, but the other 200,000 that we cut out, Robbins Island can't use it unless they use it for something else. They really make a great parking lot, or they build just a roof shelter instead of having walls. I mean, Robbins Island can use it, but nobody else can use it. And so that to me is, there's some cutting that can happen, but you got to be careful on how you cut is all I'm trying to say, because I think you want to maximize your project as much as you possibly can, unless it just is not feasible. If you say, I don't want $500,000 worth of shelters, but I can take 300 of that and give that to the event center, that's cool. If that's the council's decision, that works. That works. But then nobody gets the other 200,000 either.
Additional questions here? Additional thoughts?
Okay,
Go ahead,
Julie,
Osmus. Sorry. Go ahead, Councilmember Osmus. can't see you, but I see
Thank
your
you.
mic is on.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so are we looking for recommendations right now of our thoughts and opinions of how we think we should move forward? If so, yes or no on Mr. Gramitz? Where are we at?
I think we want to have this discussion because I think there was concern that people weren't aware of what the issues were. So the discussion is important right at this point in time. If the council felt real strongly that they had a direction they wanted to go, this meeting was set up. So potentially, if it's just a finance meeting, that's fine, but it's also, was advertised as a finance city council meeting. But it was issues for discussion. And so from my perspective, we got a council meeting coming up on Monday where these decisions can be made.
Okay. So I don't have to like weigh in on my opinion right now.
Well, this is the time to talk about it. I think, if you want to, talk about it tonight and then talk about it for 2 hours on Monday night, that's fine too. But I think if we want to air out all our thoughts, this is the time to do it.
Okay.
But you may want to think about it over the weekend and then come to a decision on Monday night as to what you want to do and give staff and the committee's direction. So this is really kind of a forum to talk about things. So if you have anything else, if you want to throw something out there, by all means.
Well, I don't know if it's a done deal as far as Robbins Island, but I think we have to go ahead with the parking lots and the way that was going to get designed out there. That, to me, that is a full community project and is advantageous to the most people, if that makes sense. Hold off on the outbuildings to see how some of the revenue comes in. And then I still think we need to start moving forward with the architects and the designs so that we are ready to move. Instead of not having anything, I don't think we can just not do anything. And I totally am with Councilmember Plowman saying this is just so unknown. How can we even plan anything when we honestly do not know what's going to happen here? But I just don't think we can't just stop the process. That's my opinion.
Councilmember Alvarado and then Councilmember Meske.
Thank you. I agree there's a lot of unknown. I agree with Councilmember Plowman, and I understand that, but I also agree with Councilor Osmus. We have to still make steps and move forward. Our city is still growing. We've got this plan in place, and I believe it's going to be advantageous. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create some excitement for the city. I don't believe we should send a message that we're closed for business. I think we should keep on moving forward. I think we should prioritize. I think as a council, that's going to be our decision to hear what the Invest in Wilmer has to say. But we're the final. At the end of the day, we're the ones that make that decision that says yes, we're going to move forward, or I think this should be one, and this should be two. I think that's how we should look at it. Hear what they have to say, make the decision, move forward on the Swanson Field, and move forward on Robbins Island, and then prioritize after that. That's my opinion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Councilmember Meske.
Well, I just think that those answers do set the priority that people have already for a couple of the projects. But again, I'm going to reiterate the fact that if we have a new budget, if COVID has created a new situation and we don't know what the future of that is going to unfold, I don't think it's irresponsible to ask those committees to say, hey, this is the new projections are coming in. And so if we were to make all those projects cut proportionately, what would be the priorities of your project at that point? Because again, you may sit around here and certain people sit on certain committees and you're more versed on it. I do not sit on any of the committees. I'm on the steering committee. It would be nice to have the champions that brought this forward explain what they would cut if they had to deal with that new budget. So I appreciate that we're looking for the council's direction, and we will provide it. I just want to hear what the folks that put these projects together, where they see, if we say, this is the new budget, here's the new values, what would you cut out of this project so we don't make a mistake and destroy a project? I mean, the people that put these forward had ideas, and I think everybody understands we're in a new economic situation. I really want to hear those folks chime in before I start saying that I value this project more than this project. I think we have those groups are ready to go. A lot of them are just waiting for us to come up with how we're going to finance them. I guess the question for me would be, are we prepared to, as a council, are we interested in bonding dollars for the full amount if we aren't going to collect it in local option sales tax? Because I, for one, am not, but that would be a question I have to hear an answer for before we even start. Because if we're truly having a new budget, then I think it's on us to ask those committees to chime in on it. But if we're going to fund it, that's a different story. But again, I don't have a lot of interest for that.
Administrator Gramitz.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, from the city council, I think, to give direction to the committees. And like I said, I've admitted to this. I'm no finance guru, but when I do the math, and I think Mr. Green, has a spreadsheet that he could put up and show you all kinds of, if you adjust the interest rate and you adjust this and the capital and all this, happens automatically. He's got a better handle on that than I do. But I come up with at the end of 13 years as being 10 million short of the 30 million. So if we just tell everybody, expect 2/3 of your project, to be funded, and then do 1/3 as an potentially alternate that could be added on if we can obtain reauthorization in 10 years or an extension of our current sales tax. That's direction, and I think that would be perfectly reasonable to send that to the committees and say, talk to your architects about setting up your deal. You got 2/3 of what you had before, and you can plan on the big picture, but you may not get funded that. So figure out how to do it, and that's helpful.
Councilmember Meske, did you have additional comment? You were just given a thumbs up?
That was right on point.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Gramitz, do you want to proceed? I think one of the things that I was curious about the conversation tonight is, when do we have to make a decision? There's an awful lot of things going on right now, and so do we, I'm not suggesting that we just put this off. I think there are some pieces with the different committees, et cetera, but I'm not sure we have to make a decision either. And so I think that's a question that I have for the council members too, is, this is not something we have to do tonight, but when do we do it and how do we do it? Mr. Gramitz?
Each of the committees is in a different position in the development of their project. Each of the architects has got a different location in the process. The event center is probably 50% through design, and some of the other ones haven't basically started. So we need to probably let the event center committee know pretty sure that instead of $10 million, you only get $6.7 million. That's going to impact the design. The event center and the rec field, I think chairman were sitting there thinking that they were going to potentially look at maybe doing a joint project where the inflatable dome maybe goes away and it gets replaced with a steel structured plastic covered, not inflated, but just supported by the steel structure, sort of a facility that would incorporate the things that the event center wanted and also the things the rec field wanted. And that by itself is, you've got two separate architects, on each one on each project. And now you're saying, now we're going to combine these two. It just creates a lot of interesting potential mayhem in just trying to coordinate that sort of a thing. So, they're going off in a direction that says, how can we do our project and keep the cost down? But I don't even know if it's potentially legal to even do what they're thinking they're doing because of the referendum, because of the legislature, because of the language. I don't know it is or isn't, but what I've asked them to do was at least maybe talk to their committees, and if they're interested, maybe they could combine some things. What that does is it just makes this way more complicated than keeping the separate projects and saying, okay, you get 2/3 of whatever you got, you get 2/3 of whatever you got planned, and move on. So there's some things that are going on that I've never dealt with before. I have no clue how this is going to work out. And quite honestly, in talking with Mr. Scott, it just raises questions of whether or not we can even do it. So I guess my point is, reiterating, the committees are at different levels in their development, and the sooner we tell them what to expect, the better, because in a month, the event center could be 3/4 designed, kind of a thing. And we spent 3/4 of the money. So any change that happens after that will cost us more money because they've already gone down the road so far based on what their committee told them. Okay, thank you.
This is a question for me, and then I'll go to Councilmember Davis. But if we're basically saying we can't afford to do them, then do we want them to be doing something different, or do we want, there's also the concept of do it right or don't do it, kind of thing. So do we want to wait to do it right, or are we telling them to cut, to do something totally different? So that's a question that I have with, if you can't afford to do it the right way, then should you do it, kind of question. And I think that's a question the council needs to address too. But Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, just going off of what Mr. Gromans was saying, tomorrow we have an event center meeting, and it was going to be discussed merging the two event center and the rec fields. And we already have had drawings made up for the event center, which now I think are going to go to the wayside and we have to start over. So I don't know how that works. And, obviously we maybe won't be saving money even that way. I don't know. I don't know what to tell them tomorrow, I guess.
Mr. Gromans.
Well, one thing I think that we could, take a look at is what we did with Robbins Island. And that was, we put the shelters on as alternates. And so maybe the thing to do is say, it looks like we're only going to have 2/3 of the money in the end, but build it out or design it like you think it should be done, but make identifiable alternates and say, the event center, we're going to do these 5 things, but these other 2 things are alternates. The rec field, we're going to do these 2 things for sure, but the other 2 are are alternates. So we've already done it with the Robbins Island project, and I think it can be done. And then if you have more money than you expect in year 8 and 9, if the economy comes back and you're going like, hey, we got now enough money to do those alternates, then do them. You know, but at least it's designed, it's all put together, and the plans are sitting there, and you did do 2/3 of what everybody asked, but you're prepared to do the rest of it when you have enough money. So that's one way of doing it, and you know, we've already done it once.
Additional questions? The silence would tell me we need to take this and digest it, but is there comments about what we want to do tonight, or what? I think we've got some more items to go through on the agenda here. Have you heard what you want to hear? Are we going to talk about bonding?
Yeah, Mr. Green, did you have anything that you wanted to, you know, show that would be of great benefit in helping them decide what to do?
Well, I certainly can. I think that's up to you, and I'll leave that to your discretion. I'm not sure this is the time for it. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, it's pretty small, but.
Okay. Well, Brian, you've laid it out. You know, you all talked about it conceptually, and this kind of just puts it into practice a little bit. And again, maybe we do this now, maybe we do this later, but I'll start with this. What this financial model does is it's a very broad macro planning tool. It just provides general ideas of what can be supported by sales taxes. And as Brian mentioned also, so you can just do quick changes. You can select different projects. It sounds like, you know, there's not a lot of appetite for just getting rid of one of the projects. But then again, it kind of helps do the math quickly just by eliminating, you know, $5-10 million and see what that does. If you want to talk a lot about these projects being scalable, it sounds like most are. Maybe some are more than others. It allows you to change the year, the construction and the bonding, and the repayment period. And then, of course, the big one is the sales tax revenue. So because I am a visual person, maybe, and Brian and Steve, please stop me if you decide, you know, we don't want to go through this in detail tonight, but maybe just by looking at this very briefly, it might help people digest this conversation that you all have been having, and you know, we can come back another time and go and run different scenarios. But what this does is it just takes the projects up here, again, in no particular order, just as I typed them in. The authorized amount, whoops, I'm on a different scenario, sorry. We're moving around. And I understand looking at a spreadsheet with this many numbers first time is not easy to do. So hopefully I can walk through it pretty clearly. Your authorized project amounts, which you're very familiar with, the soft costs, which we've been talking about, and so that's paid for with current sales tax revenues, gets us up to around that 1.8, and then the remaining amount. So the question is, how are you going to finance it? Again, this is just a scenario, just as a starting point, really as a visualization. So assume you went ahead and did it all this year. We have, it's a 13-year sales tax, but there's 12 repayment periods. The way with bonding, if you were, again, it's just conceptually, if you were to issue the bonds this year, you would start paying interest on them in 2021, but the first principal payment wouldn't be until February of 2022. So, you know, with each project, you would have project years 2020, there's 12 repayment periods, the first principal being in 2022, the final principal payment being in 2033, and we're around 2%, you know, 2.5%. It's not going to make that much difference in the overall broader plan. So So what we can do here is, turn these projects on, off, and, see what the result is. We can change this amount and look at how this affects overall debt service each year. Again, these are projects that you've been talking about. Here's your roughly, this just comes out to $450,000, but roughly $500,000. And you can see the annual debt service. One of the limitations, again, this is not an accounting of what we think how the actual cash flows will be. One of the limitations of this spreadsheet is this just allows for equal annual payments of principal and interest. In reality, as you've been discussing, we can phase in principal. So, just looking at two scenarios here. We're starting it with a zero balance because all of that's being paid for. All the soft costs are being paid for with current revenues. And then next year there will be some interest payments that could be included in the project costs, and you could pay for them down here. Or if there's some remaining amount, those sales tax revenues could pay for interest next year. But just to keep things simple, we're showing going into for collection 21, starting to pay principal and interest in 2022. These are our payments, and again, this is the big unknown, $1.7 million. So you can see, we'd be short about 900, almost $1 million each year if we went ahead, if we assumed this future sales tax revenues. I guess we could all have different opinions about the likelihood of these projections, and ultimately, I guess we are going to have to decide on make an assumption on a certain future revenue stream. Another way to go about this, and this is what you have been talking about this whole time, is just say, okay, we think we're going to, we're 1.7. If that's the number you've decided that we're going to be in 2020, future is unknown. So let's finance the projects, just assuming 1.7 each year, knowing that it could go up. And as it does go up, and as you get more information, then you can add on additional projects or complete projects that you scale back. So, I would say, I don't know if you want to just look at different scenarios, but maybe just by looking at this kind of puts, because I am a visual person, this kind of puts some numbers into what you've been discussing conceptually. So Brian and Steve, I'll let you give me direction from here about if we go any farther with this.
Madam Chair, Doug, if you could just give the council a visual notification of removing let's say the rec center of $10 million and the effects that it has on the schedule. And as you were mentioning, you can, add or subtract any of the projects. You can change the year of the project to when the debt service starts. We've been working with a number of different scenarios, but just show them a visual of if you remove the event center, if you could.
Okay, so we'll just turn the event center off, and you see, this revenue scenario, clearly, you have a surplus, basically break even the first year, and then looking ahead, there's annual surpluses. And again, these numbers are going to get revised maybe twice a year, or once we get into a more stable environment, maybe just once a year. This future revenue stream will get revised. But that's just by not doing the event center, and if you assume that this is the future revenue stream you're going to have more than enough.
I guess the only comment I would have is that this scenario or worksheet could be each one of the projects, as was discussed by the council and in the meeting, could be revised down to 2/3, just as an example. And these are only, I mean, I'm not suggesting by any means that the event center should be removed. I'm just asking for the visual so you can see the effects and the things that could be different scenarios that could be calculated with this worksheet.
Yeah, I would just point out that from what I can see through my trifocals, is that it looks like we're about $4 million short on scenario 1.
Well, that's cumulative, right? But each year, if we do get back up to that 2.4 million per year, and ultimately we finance all the projects, and we're paying for, right, we're around this 2.6, 2.7. The annual shortfall, yes, is around $300,000 in this scenario. But of course, this is the big unknown. Now, what can happen is, in terms of issuing these bonds, is remember, we're say you did move ahead with this $5 million in projects, and you did amortize it out over the full period, which is legally authorized. We could put, for not that much more in interest rates, a 2-3 year call on here. So when we get more information, and we have a better sense of what future revenues are, maybe there's a change in law that does allow us to go past collection past 2032 in 1, 2, 3 years. Then you can restructure these, put a 3-year call option on here, and then once you do more projects. So that, again, that's not a suggestion, that's just a gives you an idea about the different flexibility we have in planning for these projects.
Okay, I think from my perspective, Chairman Nelson, is that we wanted to be able to show, the city council that there is a tool that is available to us with this spreadsheet that we can make adjustments and make it work out, but it's all predicated on assumptions. And this gets back to what was earlier stated. We don't know the answers to those, assumptions 100%. So it could go either way, but I think what's being, suggested as an option would be to leave the city council's options open by looking at, a call date where we could say, okay, now we know more information, and we got our extension from the legislature, and we can go out now and let's do all the projects. And we're only 3, maybe 4 years into the 13 years. So it does give you a little bit of safety blanket to say, let's get the project started. We can't do them all, but as time goes by, we'll know more information, which then we can then make a decision on refinancing the whole package and bringing more projects in. So we do have something that we can do the analysis on, and that's what Steve and our finance people will be using to answer any questions you might have. So,
Madam Chair, we do have a question from Councilman Schwantes about sending the spreadsheet out to everybody, and that certainly can be done.
That sounds good. Does anyone else have a question or a request? Okay, then we're probably good with the spreadsheet, and we say thank you to Mr. Green. And should we go back to see what our next steps are going to be, or do we want to move on, just take this for information for now and looking for direction here?
Councilmember Nelson?
Go ahead, Councilmember Asmus.
I have a question on that spreadsheet. Is that a certain program, or will we be able to manipulate those numbers once it's sent to us?
Yeah, I need to, I'll probably, just to be very frank, and I apologize for maybe saying something different than you said, Steve. I'll need to ask about our ability to send this out to everyone. Okay, and I'm not saying that we can. I guess I'll just, I know, we have proprietary issues with our financial models, and so some things we can and some things we can't, but I'll just need to have that conversation internally. But at a minimum, it can be, I think it can be available to city staff.
Madam Chair,
in a shared location.
Madam Chair.
Doug, this is Kathy. We're going to have a problem with that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Kathy. Would you repeat?
Yeah, I said I don't think we can work that out. I don't think we'll have a problem with that. And Doug's got it set up here so that the pieces that you can enter information into are in blue, just to try to give you a little sense of where you'll break it if you try to put information in. But we'll work through that tomorrow and communicate with Steve.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Elkins, did you have something else?
Yeah, I'm just, and I think Kathy and Doug talked to that. If I misspoke, and that is some proprietary items, which I think we can work through, staff can create an Excel spreadsheet similar to this for the council to use for different scenarios if that's a tool that will be helpful in making those decisions.
Okay, I think a view of what we've gotten here is helpful. And are we through with the spreadsheet?
I would think so.
Okay, I cannot see all the council members, so I don't know if anyone else has the question. And otherwise, I will go back to Mr. Gromitz to back to our agenda.
All right, we'll wait for the screen to come back here in a second. But I think generally speaking, I think we've gone through the Invest in Wilmer projects that everybody can think about it over the weekend. We can put it on as an item on the agenda for Monday night. So if anybody's prepared at that point in time to make decisions and assist the committees in determining their project scope, it can be done. Or if everybody was excited about doing it, I think you probably could do it tonight also. So other than the information that you've been provided on that, if there's no more questions on the Invest in Wilmer stuff, then I would suggest we probably slide it over and Steve can work through the operating budget items that were included in your packet.
I would just request that if council members do have additional information that they request that of staff before Monday night, so that there is a chance for everyone to review that. Not sure how the agenda item will look on Monday, but that would be a request that I would have. Go ahead, Mr. Gromitz.
Okay, moving on to the next one. Steve, are you willing to?
If I could just interrupt, I see Councilman Asmus' microphone is on if she's got a question.
I also,
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
a second, Councilmember Osmus. I see Mr. Green also wanted to say something, and I'm not sure if he wants to do that before Councilmember Osmus.
He can go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Osmus. No, I was just going to sign off and say thank you very much.
Okay.
And
Thank you very
All right.
much for being here.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead. That spreadsheet was very helpful. I'm a visual person and that laid it out beautifully for me. I just wanted to just go back just to make sure that I understand about the community center and the city hall. So when we were looking at the 8 or 10 million to build the city hall, we were looking at bonding for that, correct?
That is my understanding, but you do, if you wanted to use reserve fund balances, you could reduce it by whatever amount you so wished. If you had some available and you wanted to use it, you could do so.
Okay. I guess I was, part of that discussion, I would think. I don't know if we saved that for Monday night or if that's because we're already past that point here in this meeting. I'm not sure. But what I'm thinking is when we think about the taxpayers and what they would like to see us do with the economy right now and with the funds, I can't see that they're going to be in favor of building a city hall when we're in a recession and dealing with whatever it is that we're dealing with, which then is a part of the community center. And even though we said that we can't then take that 2 million that was supposed to be slotted for the community center and give it to any of the other projects. We know that's not legal. I'm just wondering where we're at with that planning stage then. Everybody else can go back to their committees and say, yep, we're gonna try to cut your project or our projects by 2/3. What's our plan A? What's our plan B? What's our contingencies? But the community center, since it's paired with the city hall, doesn't have that option. So I'm just a little confused as how I'm supposed to go back to the community center group with an answer on this.
I'm going to ask the question a little different because I'm not sure that where we're at with any of the projects other than perhaps the Robbins Island one. So I would feel that message probably is the same right now to the other groups that were on hold, but I don't know that for sure either. And whether that's kind of back to that, do we recommend they make cuts or do we recommend they hold? And I think that's a question for the council. Administrator Gramitz.
I guess I would agree. We had, although we may have a consensus that, the message back to the committees is drop down to 67% and do the other 33% as alternates, even though that was stated and I saw some heads nodding, yes, that was and maybe even a thumbs up, but that really wasn't a direction from the full city council. Okay, so the council needs to come to the decision as a group. Is that the message? Are we asking everybody to delay? And that's what this whole discussion is all about, to air out all the ifs and or buts kind of issues, and also address the implication of what these decisions have on the tax levy and on our debt levy, and and what it means to our 2020 budget, which we'll talk to in a little bit, and what does it mean for our planning for our 2021 budget, which staff will be working on, for the rest of the summer and fall. So this is you know, I call it, this is big smoke. This is all the finances wrapped into one, of which we're actually talking about our normal street project that we said, yep, we have to do that. Then we got our Invest in Wilmer projects that here's some ideas on how to deal with those. How are we going to deal with City Hall and Community Center? Because they're tied together, which is different than any of the other projects. And then how do we do our budgets? So it's all encompassing. How does it all work together? And this is just the discussion aspect of it. But at some point, whether it's next council meeting or the one after that, we're going to have some direction. And so that's where we find ourselves. And we'll take it. We'll take the direction whatever the council collectively gives to staff and committees.
Any other comments to Mr. Gramitz, or should we move on to the operating budget?
If there's no question, if everybody feels, that they've got enough information that they can think about over the weekend, by all means, if you have questions, send me an email. And as you've noticed, what I do is if you send me a question, I answer it and I give it to everybody. And no question is out of bounds relating to this, because I think as much information as we can provide you, that's our job. So if you have questions after we move on to the next topic, by all means, just send it in. So if we're ready, we can move on to the thoughts of, yes, this COVID-19 virus thing has an implication on our operations as it deals with, do we start cutting now in anticipation of 2021 to soften the blow, or how do we go about all of this, or do we just ignore it and work on 2021's budget later this year? So that's a segue to Mr. Olkins to kind of talk about what staff has discussed as far as what we can do in 2020, whether it's delay projects or cut things in order to save money in anticipation of 2021. So, Mr. Olkins.
Thank you, Mr. Gramitz. Members of the council, mayor, included in the packet was kind of a high level scenario, and I'd like to just preface, based on the discussion that we've had up until this point in the meeting, is that there's still a lot of unknowns, both at the federal, state, and local level as far as funding mechanisms. You should have all received an email from the League of Minnesota Cities and a bill that's been introduced in the Senate as far as their distribution of the federal care money that they've received. That was only a bill in the Senate. The League of Minnesota Cities and the coalition continue to work on legislation to distribute those dollars. As was stated in that, it was based on a per capita basis, is what the Minnesota Senate is basing it on. That was at $87 per capita, which equates to approximately $1.7 million to the city of Wilmer. Now, again, that is only being proposed in the Senate at this point. As we've talked about to this point throughout the meeting, is that in the next 30 to 90 days, there'll be a lot of things that will happen, a lot of maybe clarification on a number of items. And so my summary and high level presentation is trying to address things that have occurred or proposals to this point. But again, there is still a lot of unknown actions, not only in the local option sales tax, but the finances for the city as well. So in looking at the report, I tried to start off with where are we at with the 2020 general fund as far as what was approved, the different areas of revenues that we were anticipating. And again, the major revenues that we have coming to the city are the general property taxes. at 5.8 million in the 2020 budget. The local government aid, again, at this point, there's been discussion of possibly some cuts or unallotments. And again, that would be dependent upon if the legislators are able to propose something before the end of session, which is next Monday, the 18th. All indications are that we are probably headed for a special session. Again, the governor was addressing the state at 6 o'clock, so we will again know more, maybe information tomorrow and the weeks to come. The local government aid amount is 4.9 million. I guess it was unclear about the state's distribution of the federal care money of 1.7, if that is, if they're looking at replacing some local government aid, if it's in addition to the documentation that might be required. To date, we have incurred a little over $11,000 only for COVID type expenditures, which are extra computers, sanitation equipment, those types of things. It does not include any costs that might be reimbursed for the emergency paid sick leave, which is 80 hours for employees who have been restricted to stay at home and considered non-essential. We are calculating those costs as we know of who qualifies and who will be taking advantage of that. So there's, again, a lot of working parts as we move forward. The administrative transfers of 2.5 is contributions from the municipal utilities. The municipal utilities has indicated projections that they are going to see some reduced numbers. Again, a lot of working parts, but those are the major revenues that we see. I guess the other item that I put in there were service charges. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the different scenarios of best, moderate, or worst case scenarios. The service charges are primarily arrived at from building permits, which we anticipate based on the activity that's going on to be at the levels that we anticipated. We don't anticipate any reductions in those charges, but we do look at the aquatic center, civic center, park and rec programs, and the ability to offer those programs. And in some cases, the city would incur less costs due to some of those programs not generating enough revenue to cover the programs. And we are in conversations with the department heads. Administrator Gromitz issued a directive for departments to submit possible reductions in their departments of 5, 10, or 15%. Some departments have been able to provide those types of numbers. Some departments, an example being public safety, have not been able to meet those. So we are still meeting as staff to evaluate those, and we'll have that as we move forward as well. That's why in the scenario that we presented tonight, you don't see those 5, 10, and 15% projections, because again, it's a moving target, and we have to have those conversations with the various departments. But somewhat talking about the best case scenario. Best case scenario is we know that interest earnings are going to be less, just with the market that it is. And we, as far as property taxes, we know that they are going to be delayed to some degree based on the county's action to delay or defer interest and penalties for 2 months. Now, that is the interest and penalties, so we anticipate there be some individuals that pay property taxes later due to that. Property taxes for those that are escrowed and for larger tax-paying entities that did not apply to them. And so again, we will know in a couple months the effects of that and the potential of non-payment. In the best case scenario, we anticipate everybody to pay their property taxes. It might be delayed or deferred and then the cash flow projections would have to cover that. So in the best case scenario, to summarize that, we anticipate that there would be some reduction in revenues, primarily interest earnings, but this could and would be covered by areas like non-filling of full-time positions, fuel prices at the pump being less than what they were at when we budgeted, and would be able to cover it through the normal budgeting process. But in the moderate case scenario that I put together for the council, again, we talk about property taxes, and that there would be a delay, again, as I mentioned, but could possibly be some reductions for non-payment. I guess we won't know that until we get a few months down the road, and what kind of extensions that we'll be facing with the stay-at-home order and or the governor's emergency declaration on timelines on those. And that's, it could be, like I said, 30 to 90 days. It could be 6 months. I guess it's just something we don't know at this point. We also looked at the service charges. And again, we could be looking at $100,000 to $200,000 in reductions in revenues. But again, it would be dependent upon what programs are able to be offered and what programs, based on the governor's declaration, could not be. And I know there is a lot of communication amongst cities asking if there is intent to open up aquatic centers, offer different type programs. And again, that goes to social distancing and whatever restrictions that the governor has out there. Moving on, possible capital projects that departments have mentioned, possible delay. I know this was an item where the city fell behind back in 2008, 2009, and we have in the current years tried to catch up on those types of items. But it is an item that the council would have available to them to consider, and those items have been identified and were included in a list based on department recommendations from the directors that directly monitor or cover those items. Again, so summarizing the moderate case scenario, we could, or the council could consider possible reductions in different types of programs by not offering different aquatic center, those types of programs, or deferring or delaying capital improvements, and or verifying revenues as we move forward. The last worst case scenario that was put forth are possible reductions in property taxes due to a 5 or 10% delinquency. The city has not experienced that in the past, but we are not in the normal economy. We're not in the normal circumstances. And so I don't know if anybody has ever been at this point ever before. So that is certainly a possibility. We also looked at state aid. All the discussion to this point has been hinted at. Nothing has been confirmed, but there has been discussion about a 10% cut in local government aid. And we would be looking at approximately $500,000 if that was to the case. And that would include local government aid. We also get shared highway aid, which comes from the gas tax. And we also get police aid. And again, based on what the state of Minnesota does, that may affect the 2020 budget. That may be carried over, and they would defer it until 2021. Administrator Grommetz, do you have a comment or question? I see your mic is on.
No, I'm just prepared.
Okay. So going to the continuing on with the worst case scenario, it could, with those items and investment earnings, is an amount there as well, 25 to 30% reduction. The possible reductions in revenues could range from $800,000 to $1.2 million. I go on to give the council, based on their fund balance policy where various fund balances are, the cash flow, self-insurance, and employee labor liabilities, which would include severance pay for employees who have left that qualified under the early retirement program, as an example, insurances of basically, again, the severance, the 430 for those that qualified, accrued vacation and sick leave liabilities that are there, to name a few. The 600,000 is an estimated amount as the excess for 2019 as we move forward. Those are unaudited at this point. But those are basically some areas, as well as the possibility of deferring some capital, if that's what the council chose to do. So there are some possibilities to close that gap of $800 to $1.2 million. Again, a lot of information is still pending from the state of Minnesota, that being the $1.7 million in care distribution. The state has not directly given information of possible cuts in LGA or other types of deferments. And again, if they're going to address those in 2020 or 2021. And so those are some options for the council. Also included in the packet was the charter section, which talks about the budget and the processes that can be used for reduction of appropriations, use of reserves, or the administration of the budget or lapse of appropriations, and also a listing of the capital. So the alternatives that were listed, again, were move forward with the 2020 budget programs as budgeted until we know more information, identify some potential targeted programs, ones that may be known based on the governor's declaration, i.e. the aquatic center, civic center, or recreational type programs, or other operating programs. Directing staff to modify some of the budgets based on Administrator Graham's directive of a 5, 10, or 15% reduction. And as we are starting the 2021 budget process, and the mayor is well aware of this process, those adjustments could be discussed and done during that process as well, not only current year adjustments or deciding to recommend they be done in 2021. With that, Administrator Gromits, I don't know if you have things to add, but that would be my summation of what was included in the packet.
I think, overall, we all understand that there are a lot of unanswered questions and things that were known today may be different tomorrow after we hear what the governor had to say. So the plus side is that Wilmer has been fiscally conservative throughout the years and has enough resources available if you wanted to just carry out 2020 just as you budgeted. That capacity is here. Not saying we want to do that. I'm just saying you have the luxury that other cities may not have because you have cash reserves. Some cities don't have those, and they're really going to be hard up. But Wilmer's in a good position. So then the question, quite simply, is do we start making some adjustments this year in anticipation for maybe 2021 being a little bit rougher? And I guess we can do that. It's something the council should consider. But at this point in time, I don't know that I have a recommendation of how much to cut, because I don't know how much local government aid is going to be cut. I don't know, there's just, how long is the stay-at-home going to be in place actually? Is it 1 or 2 more extensions? I don't know. These are all things that They do impact our operation. They impact the ability of the community to pay their taxes. But on the plus side, we can get through that. We have enough funds to handle that. So then the question, quite simply, is if we're good with 2020, we'll get through it. It's 2021 after we know local government aid is cut by 10% or 15 or whatever. Then we really have issues. But we will know in plenty time in advance to deal with it. So I hate to say relax, kick back, wait for the questions to be answered by the state, but for some of it, that's just the way it is right now. We don't have the answer, and all we can do is maybe set a structure up where if this happens, we will do that. And you know, the staff and Steve has tried to put together some pre-thoughts on what we would do should cuts be necessary or delays be required of certain projects. So we have a plan, but we don't know if we're jousting at 10%, 5%, 15 or 20% reduction in local government aid. We just have, you know, an estimate at this point in time. So that's where I think where we find ourselves. But if anybody does have information that would be good for the cause, if they have an inside track to what's going on with local government aid or any of the other things, by all means, pass your contact information on, because it'd be nice to know it as early as possible. So that, I think, is just lays the groundwork for what we can do in the future once we get more information as we progress down the line. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Okins and Mr. Gramitz, for the operating budget information. Does anyone have a question for either one of them or regarding the budget? I'm not seeing any questions. Is there anything else that you wish to ask questions about before we go to just review future agenda items? Mr. Okins, is there anything else that you want to cover?
No, the agenda item for 2021 would be the next. But as far as the 2020, if there are no questions, we will provide information to the mayor and council as we become aware of it. It is, I'm sure, with the end of session scheduled for Monday the 18th, with the mayor's or the governor's address to the state tonight, that in the week and months to come, that we will be providing a lot of information to the mayor and council as it becomes available to us.
Okay, my apology, Mr. Gramitz. Is there something that yet on the 2021 operating budget? And then I see Councilmember Meske has a question too.
I would defer to Councilman Meske.
Go ahead.
Not a really big question, but what we had a sort of a general not hiring phase that we are in currently. What kind of realized savings have there been there? And if we do not hire, given our circumstance, what kind of savings would we have on that? Because that actually directly impacts that budget we're talking about.
Well, we've not hired a lot of, or all of the part-time people. We have not hired. One thing I will point out is like the aquatic center, if that does not become operational this summer, they always cost more than the revenue that gets brought in. So you have a tremendous amount of savings just from operations. Even though you do lose some revenue, it's really offset by a lot of expenses. I would expect that we probably only will have 2 or 3, full-time positions that were really vacant for a portion or all of 2020. So even if you threw, $100,000 at them, you're talking $300,000. It's not going to make or break one way or the other. Yeah, it feels good that you saved 300,000, but the fact is, if the local government aid got cut $1 million, one, it's not enough, and two, we have other sources of money to backfill that should that happen if the council so wishes. Steve, did you have something?
Yeah, the $300,000 number you mentioned is pretty close to the amount. That would include the finance position that the labor has talked about. There's one police position that is in the process of being filled, and the police chief had given us the amount of about $30-some thousand just due to the delay of that. The part-time people of the aquatic center, recreational, and an intern in the planning area. So the $300,000 is the target that we know of at this point.
Are there any other questions? Is there anything else on the 2021 budget that we didn't cover? Mr. Elkins or Mr. Grant?
Are you asking about the 2020 budget or the 2021 budget calendar that's in there?
No, the 2021. I thought you had made a statement that we had left to deal with, and I thought we had talked about it, so I apologize. So if there's still something else, I'm asking if there's anything else we need to talk about with it.
Administrator Grammitz, did you want to address that issue?
Yeah, I would anticipate that, we're going to be working on 2021 as we get information about local government aid and as we know more information going down the road here. So I guess for our purposes, we put it out there so that you were aware. We're not forgetting, this isn't just a 1-year deal. This is a 2 or maybe 3-year sort of impact on revenue, on finances. So we're just alerting you to the fact that as we know more, we'll be including those in the 2021. And as Steve referenced, we will be letting everybody know information as we get it, so that there's a full awareness of if 2021 is going to be a bad year, or if it's it looks like it's not as bad. So.
All right, Councilmember Meske.
Just another quick question, Steve. Looking at the charter and specifically emergency appropriations, and I know you've cited them and where those current values are, and it references another subdivision that's not included there. And I don't have my charter in front of me right now. What are there restrictions on how much of those revenues you can spend at a time? I definitely believe we meet the definition currently to dip into those emergency reserves that we had to, but is there a limitation on those, or what's referenced in that other section?
I would have to research the other section you're referring to, but the charter, the section that I'm familiar with, allows the council to have up to 10% of the operating budget as the emergency appropriation. So it's an allowance. It does not have any restrictions that I'm aware of, but I'll certainly research that other section that you're referring to.
Any other questions? Mr. Elkins, anything else that we need to cover this evening?
I have nothing else unless there are additional questions.
Mr. Grammitz?
I have nothing.
All right. Future agenda items are listed there. I think they're the same as last time. And so one last chance. Does any other council members have any questions or requests? If not, I will look for, Steve, Mr. Elkins, I'm sorry.
I would just like to mention, Councilman Nelson, that the normal scheduled Finance Committee meeting of next week, Thursday, my understanding, you still plan on having that?
I believe that you, yes, that we will plan to do that. If there isn't anything we need to do, we can cancel, but I think we had talked about, I think there might be some action items on there. So plan on Finance Committee, plan on next Thursday. So anything else? All right, I just wish to say thank you to everyone for their time and energy, and this is a moving target, and so we'll look to see what information we get next. So thank you. I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.